At 9:02 a.m. on August 27, 1896, the British Royal Navy opened fire on a palace on the east coast of Africa. By 9:40, it was over. The shortest war in recorded human history had ended before most of London had finished breakfast. A king was dead, a palace was rubble, 500 people were killed, and the British Empire had grown by one more island. Most people hear about this war as a joke. The punchline of a pub quiz. The shortest war ever fought. 38 minutes. Funny, but behind those 38 minutes is one of the cleanest demonstrations of how empires actually work. Not the history book version, the real machinery. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Zanzibar was. An island roughly the size of Long Island, off the coast of what's now Tanzania, for most of the 19th century, the wealthiest place in East Africa. Its sultans ran a trading empire built on three things: cloves, ivory, and slaves.
The clove plantations produced most of the world's supply. Ivory passed through Zanzibar's port on its way to Europe and America. And before the British banned it in 1873, the slave market in Stonetown was the largest on the African continent. By the 1890s, Britain had spent decades positioning itself around Zanzibar, not occupying it directly. That wasn't how the empire worked at this point. The empire worked through indirect rule. You leave the local ruler in place. You sign a treaty, you station a consul, you make sure the next ruler is someone you approve of. In 1890, Britain declared Zanzibar a protectorate. The Sultan stayed on the throne, but every major decision had to be approved by the British. Pointed, the Sultan was now, in effect, an employee. On August 25, 1896, the Sultan, a British-approved man named Hamad bin Thawani, died suddenly. He was 49. The official cause was illness. The rumor was poison. Within hours, his cousin Khalid bin Barghash walked into the palace, declared himself Sultan, and refused to leave. Khalid had not been approved by the British. Under the 1886 treaty, no one could become Sultan without British consent. Khalid knew this. He did it anyway. He moved 3,000 men into the palace, armed them, pointed the palace cannons at the harbor where British ships were already anchored, and waited. The British consul, Basil Cave, sent an ultimatum: stand down by 9 a.m. on August 27th. Khalid sent back a single sentence: he did not intend to comply. By that morning, the British had 5 warships in the harbor. The largest, the HMS St. George, carried guns that could level a city block. Against this, Khalid had outdated rifles, a few small cannons, and one wooden yacht with a single gun mounted on the deck. The yacht was called the Glasgow. It had been a gift from Queen Victoria. At 9:02 a.m., the British opened fire. The first shell hit the palace within seconds. The wooden structure caught fire immediately. Khalid's cannons were destroyed before they could fire. The Glasgow, the gift from the Queen, was sunk in 2 minutes by the navy that had given it. Inside the palace, men were dying. The shells didn't discriminate. Servants, soldiers, women working in the kitchens. The British leader estimated 500 dead. The actual number was probably higher. Nobody counted. At 9:40, the firing stopped. The palace was a smoking ruin. Khalid had fled out the back to the German consulate next door. The British flag was raised over what was left. One British sailor had been wounded. Within hours, the British installed a new sultan, Hamoud bin Mohammed, vetted in advance. He was crowned that afternoon, standing in the rubble. Stop and look at what just happened. A king had been replaced by another king. The change took 38 minutes. It cost the British 1 wounded sailor and some ammunition. It cost Zanzibar 500 lives and most of its royal palace. And from the outside, nothing had visibly changed. Zanzibar still had a sultan. Zanzibar was still technically independent. The flag of Zanzibar still flew over the island. But everyone on the island and every neighboring kingdom watching from the mainland now understood exactly what the protectorate meant. It meant the Sultan ruled at the pleasure of the British. It meant that pleasure could be withdrawn in less time than it took to walk to work. It meant any future ruler who forgot this would also die in a burning palace before lunch. The war wasn't about Khalid. The war was a demonstration. This is how empires actually functioned. Not through occupation. Occupation was expensive. The British Empire at its peak ruled a quarter of the planet with a tiny fraction of the manpower that would have required. What it used instead was the threat of demonstrations like this one. A ruler who cooperated kept his throne, his palace, and his wealth. A ruler who didn't became a smoking ruin in 38 minutes. The math was very clear. Historians call this the imperial bargain. The bargain was simple. You keep the surface of your country. You keep your title, your court, your ceremonies. You sign the treaties we write. You let our companies operate. You let our consul approve your decisions. And we let you live. Most rulers took the bargain. The ones who didn't ended up like Khalid. The 38-minute war wasn't unique. It was a template. Variations played out hundreds of times across the 19th century. on every continent except Antarctica. The structure was always the same: a treaty, a violation, a demonstration, a replacement. The reason this war is remembered as a joke is that it happened so fast. The reason it happened so fast is the imperial machinery was operating at peak efficiency that year. The British had spent 40 years preparing the conditions on that island. The shells were the easy part. The hard part had already been done by treaties, consuls, and decades of quiet pressure. What looked like a 38-minute war was actually the visible portion of something that had been happening for 2 generations.
And here's the part nobody talks about. Khalid survived. He spent the rest of his life in exile, first in German East Africa, then Mombasa, then back to Zanzibar in 1925 as an old man. He died in 1927 at 53. Having spent 31 years outside the country, he tried to rule for 3 days. The man the British installed, Hamoud, ruled for 6 years and died. Each sultan after him was approved in advance. Each one understood the bargain. Each one kept the throne by keeping the British comfortable. Zanzibar didn't become formally independent until 1963. That independence lasted 1 month before a revolution overthrew the sultanate entirely. But the structure the 38-minute war created lasted 67 years. 5 generations of rulers. 1 brief demonstration of force. That's all it took. Look at any modern map. Look at the borders. Most of those lines were drawn by people using the same machinery the British used in Zanzibar that morning. Quiet pressure, a treaty, a consul, and when necessary, 38 minutes of fire. The official story of empire is grand wars and decisive battles. The actual story is much smaller, faster, and quieter. Most of the work was done in rooms, on paper, by men in suits. The wars, when they happened, were closer to punctuation than sentences. A short, sharp signal that the bargain was still in force. The world you live in was built by 38-minute wars. Most are remembered, if at all, as jokes, pub quiz trivia, something funny that happened a long time ago to a small island most people couldn't find on a map. But each of those small, fast, embarrassingly one-sided wars was a moment when the visible surface of the world was rearranged. A flag changed, a ruler changed, a border shifted, and then everything went quiet. Life continued. The people on the island woke up the next morning to a country that was still technically their own. 500 people died in 38 minutes so that nothing would appear to have changed. That is what an empire is.